They thought I was just a stubborn old farmer clinging to a rundown farmhouse. The HOA president smiled as she slid foreclosure papers across my table. What she didn't know. Every mortgage in her perfect neighborhood answered to me. They say you can tell a lot about a person by how they smile when they think they've already won. Vivian Cole's smile was sharp, practiced, and completely joyless. She stood in my kitchen, wearing a beige power suit that probably cost more than my tractor, tapping her manicured fingernails against a stack of papers laid neatly on the old oak table. The same table my great-grandfather built with his own hands back in 1901. No blueprints. No machines. Just sweat, stubbornness, and time. Mr. Harper, she said smoothly, sliding the top document toward me, this is the foreclosure notice. Just like that. No hesitation. No apology. Outside, my chickens clucked lazily in the morning sun. Inside, a woman who ran the Hartwell Ridge Homeowners Association was calmly telling me I had 30 days before I lost the farmhouse that had been in my family longer than most states had been paved. You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations, she continued, like she was reading a grocery list. Unpaid fees. Penalties. Interest. The bank has already been notified. I stared at the paper, then back at her. HOA regulations? I said slowly. My land predates your neighborhood by almost a century. Vivian's smile didn't flicker. That's a common misconception, she replied. Boundaries change. Jurisdictions evolve. And according to our records, your property is now fully subject to Hartwell Ridge. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and added one last sentence before walking out. I'd suggest you sign today. The bank tends to move, decisively. Her heels clicked across my floor as she left. I didn't follow her. I didn't shout. I just sat there, listening to the sound of her Mercedes starting up, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Because I knew two things for sure. First, that document was nonsense. And second, she wouldn't be standing in my kitchen unless she thought she had already beaten me. This farmhouse isn't impressive if you're used to clean lines and fresh paint. The porch sags a little. The wood shows its age. The walls carry scars from generations of winters, storms, and stubborn people who refuse to leave. But every inch of this land tells a story. My great-grandfather bought these 40 acres when it was nothing but dirt, trees, and possibility. He raised chickens here. Grew food here. Buried family here. When developers first came sniffing around in the 1960s, he amended his will with one simple sentence. This land will never be sold for development. That clause survived him, my grandfather, my father, and eventually came to me. Which is why Hartwell Ridge exists around my farm, not on it. 200 identical houses. Perfect lawns. Curved streets designed to hide the fact that they all led to the same place. And right in the middle of it all, my eyesore, as Vivian once called it. I'd turned down buyout offers more times than I could count. Checks big enough to make most people forget their principles. I always said no. That made me a problem. And Vivian Cole didn't like problems she couldn't control. Hartwell Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood. It was her kingdom. She controlled the HOA like a private government. Approved renovations. Fined residents for trash cans left out too long. Sent warning letters over the shade of paint on a mailbox. People feared her. Not openly, of course. At block parties, they smiled. But behind closed doors, everyone knew the truth. If you crossed Vivian, life got expensive. Late fees. Inspections. Administrative penalties. And now, apparently, foreclosure. What bothered me wasn't that she tried. It was that the bank backed her up. 2 days after her visit, I got the official letter. Notice of default. Issued by Regional Trust Mortgage Services. My bank. The one I'd used for years. The letter claimed I owed $12,000 in unpaid HOA fees and nearly $50,000 more in penalties for long-term violations. I read it 3 times, waiting for it to start making sense. It never did. So I drove into town. Regional Trust's lobby hadn't changed much over the years. Polished stone floors. Muted lighting. That same smell of money and nerves. Janet Morrison was at the front desk. She'd processed my paperwork dozens of times before. Always polite. Always rushed. When she saw me, her face tightened. "Oh," she said quietly. "Mr. Harper." "Janet," I replied. "We need to talk." She glanced around, lowered her voice, and gestured for me to sit. "This HOA matter," she began, shuffling papers, "it's all documented. Boundary revisions. Compliance records. Ms. Cole provided everything." "I never signed anything," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "But according to the file, your land falls under revised jurisdiction maps from 2011. I leaned forward. "Janet," I said calmly, "my farmhouse was standing before zoning laws existed in this county. How exactly did my chickens agree to HOA bylaws?" She swallowed. "The documents are comprehensive." That was the word Vivian used too. Comprehensive. Meaning, don't ask questions. I asked one anyway. "Who holds the originals?" Janet hesitated. "Ms. Cole's firm," she admitted. "She manages the records." That was when something clicked. Banks don't operate on trust. Not real ones. They verify. They cross-check. They confirm. Unless they're being fed information they assume is safe. Or unless someone wants them not to look too closely. I left the bank without arguing. That confused them. It probably confused Vivian too. Because instead of panicking, I went home, fed my chickens, and made a few phone calls I hadn't made in a long time. People I used to know. People who understood paperwork the way farmers understand soil. Within 48 hours, patterns started emerging. Boundary revisions that never went through proper county review. Appraisals that magically inflated values. HOA loans taken out against future development that never existed. Hartwell Ridge wasn't just aggressive. It was desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. The pressure campaign escalated fast. HOA letters started appearing in neighbors' mailboxes. Warnings about financial instability. Hints that property values could collapse if certain irregular properties weren't addressed. People stopped waving when I drove past. One afternoon, Mrs. Kowalski showed up at my porch. She was 78. Lived alone. Paid her mortgage on time for 15 years straight. She held an envelope in shaking hands. "They said if I signed this," she whispered, "they'd cover my HOA fees for 2 years. The paper accused my farm of causing health hazards. Sick chickens. Unsafe conditions. All lies. That's not all," she added. "They said if I didn't sign, I might lose my house." That was the moment. Not when they threatened me. When they threatened everyone else. Vivian hadn't just crossed a legal line. She'd crossed a moral one. That night, I sat at the same oak table where she'd dropped the foreclosure notice. Only now, the table was covered in evidence. Documents. Emails. Loan structures that didn't add up. And a realization so clear it almost made me laugh. They thought I was just a stubborn farmer. They thought this land was my only leverage. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. And they had no idea what they just forced me to remember. Because before chickens, before carrots, before quiet mornings, I used to make my living inside banks. There's a moment, right before a storm breaks, when everything goes quiet. That's what it felt like the morning I walked back into Regional Trust Bank. Same boots. Same jacket. Same confused farmer act. Different purpose. The lobby doors slid open, and I felt eyes on me immediately. People remember you differently when your name is attached to a foreclosure file. Conversations paused. Smiles faded. Janet saw me from across the room and froze. "Mr. Harper," she said, forcing a smile. "Back so soon?" I had a few questions, I replied easily. Figured I'd better understand how my chickens managed to rack up $50,000 in fines. Her laugh came out too fast. "Of course," she said. "Let's sit." We did. And as she pulled up my file on her screen, I watched something subtle but important happen. Her confidence evaporated. "Miss Cole's documentation is very detailed," she said again, scrolling. "Boundary overlays, compliance notes, enforcement logs." "Funny thing about boundaries," I said. "They leave paper trails." She didn't answer. "Janet," I continued gently, "banks don't foreclose on feelings. They foreclose on facts. Show me the county approval for those revisions." Her hands hovered over the keyboard. "I don't have that," she admitted. "Then you shouldn't have a foreclosure," I said. That's when she finally looked up at me, not like a clerk, but like someone realizing they might be standing on thin ice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I thanked her for her time and walked out. Because the truth was, I already knew enough. And the more I looked, the worse it got. 20 years ago, I lived in a different world. A louder one. I used to sit in rooms where millions changed hands over coffee that cost more than a week's groceries. I specialized in regional banking, quiet acquisitions, restructuring, turning bleeding institutions into profitable ones. I was good at it. Too good. And when I decided to leave, I didn't burn bridges. I just stepped away. Bought controlling interests through layers of shell companies. Let boards believe they were independent. Regional Trust was one of those banks. I never needed to be visible. Until now. The deeper I dug into Hartwell Ridge's finances, the clearer the picture became. The HOA wasn't rich. It was drowning. Loans stacked on loans. Future development projections used as collateral. Property values inflated just enough to keep the numbers looking healthy. On paper. Every loan was personally guaranteed by Vivian Cole. Her house. Her cars. Her accounts. She wasn't trying to take my land because it was ugly. She was trying to take it because she needed it. My farm wasn't the problem. It was her lifeline. Then things got ugly. HOA inspections ramped up. Residents started getting notices for nonsense violations. People whispered about refinancing issues. Panic crept in. One afternoon, I got a call from a neighbor. "They're saying you're a financial risk," he said quietly. "That the bank might collapse." That one made me laugh. But fear spreads faster than truth. And Vivian knew it. She hosted wine and cheese meetings. Talked about community safety. Painted me as the wild card who could ruin everything. Then she made her biggest mistake. She escalated from pressure to coercion. Mrs. Kowalski wasn't the only one. I found emails. Recorded calls. Promises of waived fees in exchange for signatures. Threats disguised as friendly advice. She was bribing seniors. Retaliating against anyone who refused. And the moment I saw that, the gloves came off. Because now, it wasn't just fraud. It was criminal. I called in favors. People who knew how to read between lines. How to trace money through shell companies. How to spot fake appraisals at a glance. What they found was staggering. Hartwell Ridge's development company wasn't even fully owned by Vivian. It was partially controlled by her ex-husband's bankruptcy attorney. The same man who'd helped her lose millions during their divorce. They'd been hiding assets together. Laundering debt through the HOA. Using the neighborhood as a financial sponge. If it collapsed, hundreds of families would lose everything. And she knew it. That's why she was desperate. That's why she needed my land. And that's why she couldn't afford for me to fight back. 2 days later, Mrs. Kowalski was served with foreclosure papers. 15 years. Never late once. Her crime? Refusing to sign a lie. She stood in my kitchen crying, clutching the notice. They said it was automatic, she whispered. That the bank ordered it. That was the moment the story stopped being about me. I promised her one thing. No one is losing their home. And I meant it. That night, I went somewhere I hadn't been in years. The bank's internal archives. Not the customer-facing systems. The real ones. I followed trails of internal emails. Quiet approvals. Notes that should never exist. One recording stopped me cold. Vivian's voice. If we don't move this property now, she said, the entire structure collapses. I don't care how you do it. That was enough. I packaged everything. Every fake appraisal. Every illegal loan. Every threat. And the next morning, I made a call that changes careers. And lives. The FDIC Fraud Unit. Federal investigators don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly. Within 24 hours, Regional Trust was crawling with suits who didn't smile. Files were pulled. Servers mirrored. Questions asked no one wanted to answer. Janet didn't look at me when she passed my desk. Vivian, meanwhile, started to sweat. She called me. Left voicemails. Tried a different tone. Let's be reasonable, she said. We're both business people. I didn't respond. Because the trap was already closing. 4 days later, my phone rang. Mr. Harper, a woman said, calm and precise. This is Patricia Hume with the FDIC. My stomach tightened. What you uncovered, she continued, is impressive. $47 million in fraudulent lending. Systemic violations. This case will be studied. There was a pause. And there's something else, she added. We noticed unusual authority structures at Regional Trust. Can you explain your relationship to the bank? I smiled. Yes, I said. I own it. Silence. I'm sorry, she said finally. You what? That's going to matter very soon, I replied. Because Vivian was about to learn the truth. And when she did, everything she built was going to fall fast. Power doesn't disappear when it's exposed. It panics. And Vivian Cole was panicking. I could feel it in the voicemails she left after the FDIC arrived. Her voice had changed, less polished, more urgent. We need to talk, she said in one. You're misunderstanding things, she said in another. And finally, you're making a very big mistake. She was right about one thing. This was big. But it wasn't a mistake. The boardroom at Regional Trust had always been designed to intimidate. Long table. Heavy chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a reminder of who held the power. That morning, every seat was filled. Board members. Senior executives. Legal counsel. And me. I arrived early and laid out my folders carefully. No theatrics. No speeches. When Vivian walked in 10 minutes late, she froze. She hadn't expected me to be there. Her eyes flicked from my face to the FDIC badges clipped discreetly to jackets around the room. She tried to recover quickly, forcing a smile. Is there a problem? She asked. I answered by sliding the first document across the table. A falsified appraisal. Then another. A shell company registration. Then emails. Loan agreements. Audio transcripts. The room went silent. One board member finally spoke. Miss Cole, care to explain this? Vivian laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. This is a misunderstanding, she said. We can resolve this privately. That's when I leaned forward. There is no privately anymore. The FDIC examiner stood. For the record, she said calmly, this bank is under formal investigation for systemic fraud, coercive foreclosure practices, and regulatory violations. Vivian's face drained of color. That's impossible, she snapped. You can't just. I can, the examiner replied. And I am. Vivian turned to the board, searching for support. She didn't find it. Because at that moment, they weren't thinking about her. They were thinking about prison. I waited until the room fully understood what was happening. Then I asked the question that changed everything. Does anyone here know who owns Regional Trust? The room hesitated. A few people glanced at the chairman. He cleared his throat. The controlling interest is held by me, I said. Every head snapped in my direction. Vivian laughed again, louder this time. That's ridiculous. I slid one final document forward. Ownership structure. Voting rights. Legal confirmation. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. The chairman stared at the paper. You're the majority owner? Yes, I replied. Have been for years. Vivian's smile collapsed. You're lying, she whispered. I shook my head. You tried to steal my farm, I said quietly. You didn't realize you were threatening the man who controls every mortgage in your neighborhood. That was the moment she broke. Not screamed. Not cried. Just cracked. Her confidence drained away, replaced by something raw and animal. This doesn't change anything, she said weakly. You can't touch me. The FDIC examiner stepped forward again. Oh, she said. We can. By noon, the fallout had begun. Every account tied to Vivian Cole was frozen. Personal. Corporate. Offshore transfers halted midstream. Her mansion, collateral. Her cars, collateral. Her jewelry, collateral. Every illegal loan she'd personally guaranteed was now in default. And with the bank under my authority, there was no more shielding her. She tried to run. I got the call while feeding my chickens. She's loading trucks, an investigator said. We think she's destroying evidence. I drove straight to Hartwell Ridge. Vivian was frantic when I arrived. Boxes stacked. Movers confused. Papers everywhere. She saw me and snapped. You did this, she shouted. You think you've won? She held up a USB drive. This has every resident's financial information, she hissed. One wrong move and I release it all. I didn't flinch. Already locked out, I said. Her eyes widened. You plugged that drive into a system owned by my bank, I continued. And I just revoked your access. In real time, her phone buzzed. Account suspension alerts. Then another. Then another. She dropped the drive. Federal agents moved in. She bolted. She made it out the back. But not far. Within days, the story broke. National news. HOA president accused of massive fraud. Bank investigation. Federal charges. Vivian fled the country. For a while, it looked like she might get away. And the neighborhood panicked. For sale signs went up overnight. People feared their mortgages would collapse. Their equity vanish. That's when I called an emergency meeting. The community hall was packed. Fear hummed thick in the air. I stood at the front, took a breath, and told them everything. Who I was. What I owned. What Vivian had done. And what would happen next. No one is losing their home, I said firmly. I guarantee every mortgage here. This neighborhood is safe. The relief was immediate. People cried. Hugged. Applauded. Mrs. Kowalski squeezed my hand. I believed you, she whispered. Weeks later, the call came. Costa Rica. Vivian had been arrested at a luxury resort under a false name. Extradition approved. When she walked into that courtroom in handcuffs, every family she threatened was watching. The charges were devastating. $47 million in fraudulent loans. Identity theft. Bribery. Retaliation. Every penny recovered. With interest. Hartwell Ridge changed after that. The HOA was rebuilt. Transparent. Resident-led. Mrs. Kowalski became president. The mansion Vivian once ruled from was sold. Turned into a community garden. My farm stayed right where it always had been. Chickens. Soil. Quiet mornings. Sometimes, reporters asked me if this was revenge. It wasn't. It was defense. And maybe a reminder. That power without accountability always collapses. And that sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the leverage. So here's my question to you. Where do you draw the line between protecting what's yours and standing up for everyone else? Drop your thoughts below. And if you've ever watched a bully underestimate the wrong person, you already know how this ends.